I've served for quite a number of years in Special Operations Command, and I have served with each of these blokes at different times, and I know them quite well.
How well?
Very well.
What was their initial reaction to the charges being laid?
They knew it was inevitable, given it had taken so long, and one of them actually said, sort of not bring it on, there's no bravado, but one of them actually said he would rather it was dealt with.
What was your reaction when you heard that these three men were going to be charged, the men you knew?
Astounding. It was probably, I couldn't believe that in what I know to be the rules of engagement, they've still done anything wrong, but clearly the DMP thinks that there is a case to answer, and that's why she's charged.
Can you describe the reaction of the people you work with, your comrades?
Some of them closer to the blokes are probably incensed, I suppose is a word. I think dismayed. They feel a bit let down, particularly the ones that have spent any time there. I had some SMSs which were, the content is unprintable or unspeakable. Absolute anger, couldn't believe it. Right down to people saying nothing, just toughening up, saying hell's bells. Well, here we go. What can we do? What can we do to support these guys? It's not blind support. It's support on the basis that they're good soldiers, and all the way from the senior officers down in the command have told them that they'll be supported through the court case.
Do you see it as a weight that they've had to carry since the incident happened?
I don't think you could possibly carry this without it affecting you one way or the other. I think it'd be there'd be a feeling of dread, because it's I understand that the maximum penalty is some 20 years in prison or something like that. Well, that's astounding for what the circumstances are.
What do you see as the circumstances? What have they told you about what happened that night?
What they've talked about is I don't tend to talk about whether they're in the right house or the wrong house, because that's not a decision that I know about what occurred or whatever. But I know that they entered a compound. I know that they segregated some people. I know they didn't just dash into a compound blazing away. They came into a compound carefully, as they always do. Bear in mind that not that long before, I mean some 18 months before, or 15 months before, Luke Worsley from what was 4RR then was killed in a not dissimilar circumstance in a compound clearance. So that would have been in their minds, I think anybody who's over there. They went into a compound, they segregated some people in the compound, and I believe they were given some information that someone was there that was worth talking to. Then they found themselves in a firefight in the dark with a guy with an AK-47 who was clearly intent on killing them. The Afghan National Army, who were actually leading that raid, called on the fellow to cease and desist, because they were A&A blokes outside, and I assume they said Australian commandos as well. He responded by keeping shooting. They described to me being in a room, we would call it rendered, I suppose, here, but they were in a room where the walls were exploding around them as the mud and stuff came off the walls as this bloke fired through the walls. And in an effort to protect the people in their section who were closest to this bloke, they popped a hand grenade into a room. The response was that he changed magazines and kept firing. My understanding is that he may have used up sort of the best part of 3 magazines of ammunition. That's 90 rounds of AK-47. That's 7.62 bullets that go through a mud wall without even stopping. And they then realised that he was going to keep going, he was intent on it, so they put a second hand grenade in, and he stopped. And that was when I believe they entered the room, as you would then do, and they found that the civvies and unfortunately the small children had died.
In your discussions with them, did they ever have any inkling that there were children and a woman in that room?
That's not something I've specifically spoken to them about. I've sort of stayed away from that for a point, but they, knowing them, they clearly didn't throw a hand grenade into a room they knew where there were women and children. They threw a hand grenade into a room where someone else had chosen to fight, who I assume knew the people because he was there and hiding out or otherwise. But he placed a magazine on his weapon and proceeded to engage a large force outside. So, but my belief will be till I die that they didn't throw a hand grenade into a room where they knew there were women and children.
Because you can always hear the question being asked in the courtroom, you know, didn't you hear the screams of the children? Didn't you hear in the battle?
I've never heard that mentioned before. I read that 2 days ago, and it's in the time since I knew this was going to become more developed. I've never heard that mentioned before. It's not something I've discussed with anybody. No, it's just I hadn't heard it, not because I wouldn't. But you know, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that at the time the room was exploding around them with ammunition from a 7.62 rifle, which is allegedly one of the better assault rifles in the world, and this bloke was intent on putting as many of those bullets into these blokes as he possibly could.
What's your view on the length of the process?
I find that distressing.
It's taken 19 months to get to this point. It's going to be another 6 months before the inquiry is held.
That is an aspect of it that makes me less than pleased. I speaking to them from time to time about how they feel. It dragging on is an absolute nightmare. From my point of view, I was fascinated when the Director of Military Prosecutions was appointed. She made a point of mentioning David Hicks, who was entitled to a fair and a fast trial. Well, so are these guys, and I don't think it's been fast. That's the aspect of it that's disappointing.
Have you considered the possibility that the reason these men have been charged in an Australian court is to stop them from being charged in the International Criminal Court?
That could be the case. It's above my pay grade if that's what they're talking about, and we may need to make a statement or take a stance about our relationship with the international courts. But I think taking 3 men's lives and using them as guinea pigs there must be a better way.
Has it played out in your mind how the court process will proceed along those lines of what questions will be asked, how all this will be?
Yeah, it has. I agree that all questions will be asked, because I assume the prosecutor's main task is to have them found guilty. I think that's what prosecutors do, and all sorts of questions will be asked, which I think will be fairly uncomfortable for a lot of people. I'm not exactly sure of the structure of it, but I believe it's a military court, so there will be military people who will be judging what's occurred, and I think that's probably good. I'm not sure. I think it is. Hopefully they're people that have, perhaps some of them have had similar experiences where you know, in the cool hard light of day back in Australia it's one thing, but on the night, in the dark, the noise and the confusion and the gunshots and everything else, that's slightly different.